Well, before I start, I would like to recognize Professor Dennis Hale and Professor Mark Landy. They are the professors of the political science at Boston College. I've read articles written by them. What is the Constitution? Uh, why is the Constitution not democratic? And what is American citizenship? And also taking federalism seriously. Um, those are good articles to summarize my thinking and give me a good way to do the presentation. So I would like to recognize them. So that being said, so I'll start today's sharing what is American citizenship. So, what is American citizenship? Some people are born Americans, some choose to be Americans. So, what does it mean to be a citizen of America? What is the difference of being a citizen of other nations from being a citizen of the United States of America? The first difference that comes to mind is American federalism. We are citizens of the United States, but we are also citizens of the United States and towns we live. Every American citizen obeys three sets of laws and elects three sets of governors. Federal law, state law, and municipal law are all obligatory, each in its own sphere, and it will often be the case that state and municipal law will have more immediate importance to the citizen than federal law. Much of what people understand by the word governing is not the business of the national government at all, but of the state, country, or towns. Depending on where you live, your state or town can take away your house. If it is falling apart like this, you can take away your child. If you are an abusive parent, your car, if you have repeated drunk driving convictions, and even your dog, if it has violent and uncontrollable records. So the federal government can't do any of these things. What make American citizenship unique is the robust citizenship at the local level. Throughout the country, people serve on juries, and depending on where they live, they may also serve as town meeting members or serve on local planning boards, finance committees, school and library committees, and many others. Um, for Santa Cruz County, where I live, but this is the chart of the county government, which has lots of elected as well as appointed and contracted positions that the county citizens may run for or apply to. And you can find these information online easily. In these venues, citizens have a chance to learn up close what governing means. They learn, first of all, how hard it is. I had my first experience participating in an annual town meeting in Massachusetts for 11 years. It was only a small town of 4,000 people, and it required all attending town citizens to raise their hands for every single decision on the agenda. So sometimes it ran late into the night and I fell asleep. Nevertheless, I still learn that when it comes to finding a new location for the town dump, for example, there are no easy choices, nor is it easy to determine teacher salaries or how many additional firefighters, policemen to hire, or whether the town needs a new library more than it needs a new school building, which took years for our small town of 4,000 people to make the decision. This kind of learning exposes the citizen to the kinds of choices that must be made by their own town residents, elected representatives, and executives. What members of the House and Senate must do, indeed, what the President must do, differs in magnitude, but not in kind from the demands placed on local citizens. American citizenship requires much work to do, but local citizenship is the training ground for all levels of governance. To a considerable extent, the United States remains a nation of small towns and villages. These are all real because we lived close to this kind of towns and villages before. It's very different from California, but In these small towns and villages, they're ordinary people. They are fully capable of exercising meaningful and active citizenship responsibilities. On the other hand, citizenship of most democratic countries is a simpler task. Their governments are primary national rather than federal, and even where local governments have important duties, they are carefully limited and supervised by the national government. In France, or in most of the European countries, educational policy for entire country is made by the national government, as is also the case in Japan or India. In England, the state schools, that's what Americans would call public schools, are likewise run from Department for Education in London. So in the last few decades, there has been some movement in the direction of decentralization, moving democratic decision-making closer to home. Brexit is the most important example of that movement, but there are others, like the Scots wants to be independent, the Quebecois also want to be independent, and the Catalans agitated for more governing or even national independence. But these are exceptions to the general rules in modern states, which equate democracy with rule by a central government chosen by national majority. Recently, I watched Pastor Steve Cioccolanti's plea to help his ministry out of the tyrannical Victoria, Australia, where the Premier Daniel Andrews, who is growing his tyrannical powers by the day, gave himself unlimited emergency authorization and cut off all public services from the unvaccinated Victorian citizens until 2023. As American, my first question for the ministry was, why not move to another state in Australia instead of America? Then it dawned on me that our federal system allows each state government to join the federal government, not to be controlled by the federal government. American citizens have the freedom to give consent to governance to whichever state they choose to live in. Whereas in Australia, the national government supervises all states, which have no different policies from one another. Well, correct me if you know more about the Australian politics and I'm wrong, but I think that is why they are asking Americans to help, not Australians, because the American federalism prevents the creation of a national tyranny. American states are not obligated to follow the federal government's unconstitutional rules. Remember our talk on the Constitutional Convention, which took place in Philadelphia in May 1787? The American founding fathers were in favor of the division of powers. America's complex set of citizenship responsibilities is the product of the Constitutional Convention's rejection of the centralized government. Federalism meant that American citizens would have not only political duties to perform, they will also continue to have conflicting loyalties. Those conflicting loyalties came close to destroy the Union in 1861 to 1865. But the Civil War was only the most extreme example of something that is perpetual feature of the constitutional design. We're both a nation, America, and a union, the United States of America. In addition, we live in particular places, cities, towns, or rural incorporated areas that have their own elected governments and living conditions. Part of the complexity of being an American citizen is the task of sorting out the different obligations that flow from these different loyalties. American citizenship requires the art of discernment and participation. The second difference of the American citizenship from other democratic nations is that, in the strictest sense, the Constitution creates a political order that is not democratic. Yes, you didn't hear me wrong. America is not a democracy. Well, the 45th president, Donald Trump, is not elected by a national majority, but by minorities in the states. And as we have now experienced twice since 2000, this means that the president might be elected by a minority of the votes cast nationwide. In the Senate, Alaska has a population of less than a million, and California nearly 40 million. Both are represented equally by two senators each, despite California's 53 times larger population. The Supreme Court, whose members have lifetime appointments, can veto laws passed by majorities in both houses of Congress on grounds of that if they violate the Constitution. On certain questions, appointments, treaties, constitutional amendments, and overrides of presidential vetoes. The Constitution requires supermajorities in the legislature from two-thirds to three-quarters of the votes, depending on the issue. And finally, the legislature itself has adopted rules that constrain majority rule, most notably the supermajority required to end the debate, the famous Senate filibuster. So at last we forgot in this age of referenda, unlike numerous and confusing California propositions in each election, it is not possible to have a national referendum in the United States on any question, no matter how important. So, in the national level, do you still believe that America is designed to be ruled by the bare majority democracy now? The next unique feature of the American citizenship is to think constitutionally. What does that mean? Well, the Declaration of Independence stated, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. So every new federal employee, including the president and the congressmen and women, is required by law to take an oath to support and defend the Constitution. This raises the third unique point of American citizenship. One of the basic tasks of the American citizens is to choose who will govern them. This choice requires something more than just voting for candidates who promise to satisfy our immediate demands. It means selecting candidates who will govern us within the limits established by the Constitution and to preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States. The Constitution creates a limited government. The demands that citizens make must likewise be limited. In other words, citizens need to think constitutionally. For example, they need to avoid the habit of believing that the president can do everything, or that states must adopt the same policies, or that the federal government can solve every imaginable problems. Or they would sound like the French, who demand the government to do everything. But bringing problem to solve locally is the key. Instead of federal or state welfare, the local churches know where the homeless are. The neighborhoods know which single mother needs childcare the most. And parents know what kind of school curriculum are fitting to their family values. American citizenship equals active local participation and community self-governance. The Constitution designed American citizens to be active participants of local governance, but not a demanding mob to the federal government. This view runs counter to what has become a norm in modern discussions of citizenship. The notion that the citizen's chief task is to become a more effective demander, the citizen as demander is the hero in much of the modern news and movies on citizenship, in which political participation is simply a synonym for making demands. It follows from this perspective that becoming a more effective citizen simply requires sharpening the arts of demanding, protesting, petition, and so on. The Constitution, of course, protects the expression of grievance. The rights to assemble, to speak, and to petition are essential to the American understanding of liberty. Citizenship does involve acting, yet thought should precede action. One obligation of citizenship, therefore, is to think clearly and carefully about the consequences of what one is demanding. Put simply, the citizen needs to be prudent. Lately, I found myself caught between the demanding citizens and the prudent citizens at the recall of Santa Clara County Supervisor's petition. On one hand, the demanding citizen side of me would love to see the tyrannical Santa Clara supervisors to go away immediately. But on the other hand, my prudent citizen thought kicked in and asked the question, who do we have for candidates in the in the county to take over the seats? And the answer is unknown. So people of most countries in the world are used to demand the national government to meet their needs, then to calculate how much the demand is feeding to the growth of the overreaching national government monster, such as free education, free healthcare, free childcare, green energy, free and green everything. In the United States, citizens' demands must be filtered through the sieve of the Constitution. It is not enough to want something. It is necessary to show why something is also constitutionally proper. And if so, which level of the government or even private sector can solve the problem better? I often hear my friends from other countries complain about why the American federal government does not have such and such program for citizens. I would simply respond with, this is America, the less federal program or bureaucracy, the better. The federal government should not overreach its power to what state and local government or even private sectors can fix. To think constitutionally is the advantage of forcing on even the most demanding of citizens some recognition that there are limits to what an American government may do, and therefore limits on what an American citizen may demand. The more federal government agencies and regulations, the less freedom citizens have. The Joe Biden vaccination mandate, trillion-dollar budget proposal, national debt, illegals invasion, inflation, and unemployment are what an overreaching federal government looks like in America. The American citizens have lost their recognition of the growing federal government, which perhaps is the most serious danger that the nation now faces. The fourth unique quality of American citizenship is American patriotism. As G.K. Chesterton pointed out, America is the only nation in the world that is founded on a creed. The creed is found, he pointed out, in the Declaration of Independence, which asserts that all men are created equal and endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights. This makes America different from other nations, most of which are based on blood and a common history rather than on a creed. What makes a person French, Japanese, or German is not, for the most part, a set of ideas, but a language, a history, and a certain culture. When a Frenchman says, I love France, he means something other than what an American means when he says, I love America. An American's expression mixed love of place with love of principle, liberty and justice for all, as the Pledge of Allegiance has it. This mixture of love of place and loyalty to an idea is what constitutes American patriotism. I have seen many naturalized American citizens of all ethnicities, nationalities, proudly waving their American flags in tears or with ear-to-ear smile when they were sworn in into becoming American citizens. It was certainly one of the happiest days of my life back 22 years ago. That was a beautiful picture of American patriotism based on the loyalty to ideas. The last but Not the least unique quality of American citizenship is discernment with patience. The nation faces many serious problems, and many voices urge immediate and radical solution of anti-constitutional enthusiasm. Abolish electoral college, weaken federalism, nationalize election rules. Not for the first time, many Americans are impatient with the constraints that the Constitution imposes on majority rule. This is an old complaint about the Constitution, and it erupts periodically, as it did during the Progressive Era from 1890 to 1920, around President Woodrow Wilson's presidency. He took the lead in rejection of the principles of the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution system of the separation of powers. Other eruptions of complaints, such as during the Great Depression, 1929 to 1933, and again in the 1960s. Such times of economic downfall and civil instability call for an unusual degree of discernment. The American Constitution was designed for the process of decision making within the government to be slow and lasting, to make sure the results to be permanent and substantial. The job of the citizen is to temper impulses in favor of the sober deliberation that the Constitution order is designed to encourage. The deliberation requires more than simple majority rule or rule by voting. The authors of the Constitution understood that in order to achieve anything lasting, it would be necessary to construct something more than a bare majority. But this rule is only a hurdle. It is not a barrier. Over time, with patience, supermajorities are durable and their accomplishments are long lasting. Bare majorities, by contrast, are easily overturned and their accomplishments may last only until the next election. Patience, therefore, like discernment we just mentioned, is an essential aspect of the office of the American citizen. The greatest error in thinking about the Constitution is to think it as if it's a machine that can run by itself. The Constitution is not a machine. It is a framework for government that encourages a particular kind of politics. It has a biblical pessimistic view of human nature and is anti-bare majority rule, but not idiot-proof. Therefore, the Constitution requires the same discipline from citizens who can think constitutionally, who are discerning, not demanding, patient, and patriotic. The integrity of the Constitution requires active citizens to defend it, or it is positioned to fail. The recent Virginia gubernatorial race is an example of both dysfunctional and functional American citizenship. The former Governor McAuliffe had the audacity to insist on his unconstitutional opinion that parents should have no role in directing the education of their children. The Virginian parents woke up from the government school indoctrination nightmare and elected a new governor who believes parents should be in charge of their kids' education instead of claiming governors or government's co-parenting policy. Here are some questions for all American citizens to ponder. Why would a former governor even utter such an unconstitutional statement? Why did the Virginian parents submit their parental rights to the state government? How did the Virginians wake up from the government school indoctrination nightmare? Why did Virginian citizens elect a new governor who believes in the constitutional parental rights now? The Virginians realized that as American citizens, they had voted in candidates who did not think constitutionally. as they see their constitutional rights being taken away and ignored by the officials they voted in, they exercise their citizens' duty and power to push back against the injustice and reversal of their rights. I pray that this is the beginning of the American citizenship wake-up call. In the Bible, 1 Peter chapter 5, verse 8 says, "Be alert and of sober mind. Your enemy, the devil, prowls around like a roaring lion looking for someone to devour." The American founders knew that government is a necessary evil, which, given opportunities, would not hesitate to prey upon citizens. Therefore, the constitutional republic was designed for the alert and sober citizens to be active participants of the local governance, or they will lose the whole republic. Today, we have seen enough evidence to conclude that for decades, not only American citizens have failed to be alert and sober, but the American federal and some state governments have also abandoned its constitutional duty to secure the citizens' right for life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. It is time to wake up the slumber American citizens who have given the constitutional birthrights to alter or to abolish the government and to institute new government constitutionally, or the United States of America will be gone forever before we know it. So help us God.